welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. In this video, we're going to look at another documentary film. So this is Lost Castles of England. Strangely enough, the host is Leonard Nimoy, the late Leonard Nimoy. If you were unaware of who I'm speaking of, his big claim to fame was Spock. This is Spock from the Star Wars, or Star Trek, sorry, not Star Wars. Completely different films, completely different purposes. And yes, I'm familiar with both, but he's from Star Trek. So this is an interesting film. I think it's about an hour long. I'm not sure. I was, strangely enough, watching this when I was home alone and going back and forth baking cookies. So I was baking lemon white chocolate and coconut cookies because I like to bake. And I did actually watch this entire thing. As opposed to some of the other stuff, I actually had time to. And then I watched something else that I'll review that's a surprise. So it's part of my Cinderella stuff. In fact, it's not a super surprise. It's this thing. This is the Cinderella done with Julie Andrews. And I will cover that. I just want to a couple. In fact, you guys might see that before you see this. I don't know where I'm going to put that. That's going to be a random thing. So, but on to these castles. This is very, very interesting. What this covers is the wooden castles of England. That's the reason it's called the hidden castles. It's because these things no longer exist. They stopped using them. They started building stone castles. Occasionally they destroyed the wooden castles and built the stone castles on top of them. And otherwise would deteriorate. So they abandoned them. They fell apart. And essentially they've been excavated since. So people are aware, we're kind of aware of them, but they're start digging around, and this is kind of a hidden part of history. So it talks about some of the very first castles, some of the early Norman castles, which were in fact made out of wood. These things sometimes were made to look like stone, how they were defensive, but how they were also homes and communities, and as well as being defensive structures. As a lot of castles, even the stone castles, this is part of the community. People lived there, from not just the soldiers and the people to run militaries, but farmers and artisans ended up living within these walls of these different protections of these wooden castles that don't exist anymore. We can't, basically they're excavation sites. So they were built mostly out of oak, which is the reason if you go to England today, once upon a time it was covered in trees. Now it's not. This is one of the reasons, besides, ships. So they built wooden castles, wooden monuments, and later when they were building stone things, ships, because, wood floats. That's how we got the British Navy, at least to an extent. But this is very, very interesting. It's about an hour or so long. It's nice to listen to. It's nice to watch. I'm kind of fond of some of these documentaries. As you can see, this is A&E, which I don't know if it does great stuff anymore. I don't have cable. But again, Leonard Nimoy does a very good job. They also have various historical experts talking about these different wooden castles and what they've found in these excavation sites, and how they've kind of figured out certain things on how they've worked. They do talk about the advance into stone castles. One of the things I remember, because I finally sat down to watch the end, is they talk about something that we don't really hear that much about, because we see these big stone castles, but they're gutted. The insides are gone. And the same with these, when they're doing these excavation sites, there's not a lot of leftover remains of the people who lived there. I mean, you can find some scattering pieces of metal and some pottery, but that's about it. It's hard to piece together from either the wooden or the stone castles the lives that were lived within them, the stories of the families that sheltered within these walls, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I've been to Wales, and yeah, a lot of the castles they look like giant stone monuments and they're empty inside. And I know I have a small child. She did not sleep well last night. It was one of those nights where go to bed, skipping the bath, brushing the teeth, anything, pajamas, bed. It was very, very cranky. And this is being shot on January 6th of all times, which, strangely enough, this day me and my husband had our formal wedding 5 years ago. So you guys are seeing this later in the year. But this is a very, very interesting film. But it always, when you're talking about the insides of these castles, is there are dozens of stories that we will never know of the people who lived there. And they still had a hard time trying to piece together the social structure of how these different things worked. And I remember listening to some of it and talking about how the land was, when William I, with permission from the Pope, you are now King of England. Yeah. After, battling and killing people. And then he would portion off the land to his favorites, and then they would portion off who were loyal to him, and then they would do the same thing to theirs. So that's how this land got portioned off, and they would build various defensive structures, which is what these wooden castles were, and communities grew up around them, or sometimes communities were already there, and they built these wooden castles. One of them that they're talking about at the beginning is on the border with Wales, which at the time was, one, its own country, and two, hostile, because you attacked me. So they were very, very hostile. So they had these wooden castles, which are similar to the stone castles. They're defensive structures. So, and yes, occasionally they would use fire to destroy them. Again, this is I think it's about an hour long. This is a library copy. Yeah, it's about an hour long, 50 minutes, so a little under an hour. It was very, very interesting. It was obviously very, very well done. I enjoyed it. Leonard Nimoy was a great host. Very, very educational. This is an area of history that I love. Early modern medieval area. This is what I love. I wish I was able to sit down, but I was busy baking. But it's definitely a great film to watch. So that's really the end of this. If you like this channel, be sure to check out the rest of what I've got. I'm covering some castle stuff. This is balancing off Princess Diaries and Notebooks of an Old School Princess, and then some two Tamora Pierce series. I think it's just the castles might be bouncing off the Song of the Lioness Quartet. I'm doing the Immortals next, and then I'm covering the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, which I am not balancing any sort of films off because it's 15 books long and owls. There is not going to be 15 things, film-related things, on owls, and I'm not going to try and find them. I am covering a bunch of other stuff from LGBTQ, vaccines, Caribbean American Heritage Month. I think I'm covering Jews as well. I do have, it's hard to know because I covered Jonas Salk, who created the polio vaccine, and he's both. You have vaccines, and he was Jewish, so, and I know I've covered him before. So, and I have no idea what else I'm covering. Unicorns, off the top of my head, that's coming up. Then I'm, series-wise, I am going back to Maid Cabot after the Guardians of Ga'Hoole are done. That's 15 book series plus short stories, possibly 2 short stories, and a guide. Yeah, it took me a while to get through those. But again, I'm going back to Maid Cabot for a short tweeny book series, and I'm going back to Catherine Lasky for 2, her wolves and her polar bears. The polar bears will jump into next year. And then after that, tentatively, if you're interested in series into 2024, even though this is kind of early, I'm going to look at Animorphs. So that's what I'm thinking. And yes, that's how far ahead I think. Right now I have this entire year planned out, and I'm about a third or maybe halfway through. This is being filmed in January 6th, so I'm jumping in through summer. And this is, I think, the last spring video I have to do. So, and it takes me time to be able to watch these things. Books are easier. But nonetheless, I cover a bunch of stuff. I've covered African American History Month. I am covering, if I said that already, LGBTQ this month. I covered, strangely, if you want dark LGBTQ stuff, I did cover And the Band Plays On, which is about the early stages of the AIDS epidemic. I did do both that book and that film, where they're not necessarily children related. This can be watched by any kid. Doesn't matter what age. This is completely child appropriate, and it's a documentary that's not violent, and it doesn't have anything. So that's fine. But again, I do cover, on occasion, more mature stuff. I try to keep everything family friendly, mostly. Besides that, I covered Biko, which is, yeah, that's the upper edge. That's about the apartheid system in South Africa. And then I think the other two more mature stuff that I've covered, though definitely high school, is the Joy Luck Club and The Color Purple. So those were both early on, and are film balanced. So, but I have covered those, and I covered African American History Month a couple of times. I've covered a couple of other things. Be sure to check out the rest of the channel. I have a lot of stuff. I also have various the occasional travel videos as we travel, and with our 3-year-old, and then some other educational stuff. So be sure to check out the rest of the channel. Look forward to a lot more, and leave a positive comment if you have one. Thank you.